name is Savina Francisco. I am a fantasy wildlife artist, and in this video I'm going to be talking to you about how to get accurate measurements without using a grid. Before we get started, there's just a couple of quick things that I wanted to touch on. Number one, if you'll notice, I'm drawing at an angle. I'm not drawing on a flat surface, and the reason for that is because drawing on a flat surface skews your perception, and when you're drawing on a flat surface, you're looking from the backside of the paper, and when that happens, it lengthens all of the lines, and so it's really easy to get for the eye to get confused and to start drawing ovoids rather than circles, and to get relationships skewed. So it's really a good idea for you to always draw at an angle with your paper at an angle, and also with your reference photo, if you're using one, at an angle as well, as at the same angle as your drawing paper. The second thing that I wanted to touch on is that if you notice, I am drawing with an ace bandage on. I sprained my wrist and my elbow this week, and so I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail in this video, which I normally would finish up with a detailed drawing. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to get you as far as a sketch though, and then in future videos we will cover all of the details. All right, so let's go ahead and get to step one. Okay, so let's start off with what tools you're going to need. Of course, you're going to need a pencil of some sort. It doesn't matter whether it's a mechanical pencil or a wooden pencil, either will do. Then you also want to have an eraser that is going to erase large areas. I have both a large area eraser and a detailed eraser. For this one, you're really going to need the large area eraser. If you have the detailed eraser, then that is great. If you don't worry about it. You can make do with the large area eraser. And then the final thing that you're going to need is some kind of a straight edge. If you don't have if you have a ruler, great. If you don't have a ruler, then anything that has a straight flat edge across is perfect. I wouldn't use paper if you don't have to, only because the pencil can move the paper, and it can end up skewing your lines and end up skewing your perspective. All right, so let's get to drawing. Okay, so this is the reference photo that I'm going to be using. This is my dog son, Oliver. And I'm going to point out a few things to you. Number one, when you're doing any kind of measurements, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be measuring relationships between points. Now, we're starting off with an animal, so the points that you're going to be measuring relationships are going to be the features. The ears to the eyes to the nose to the ears, all of those kinds of things you're going to be measuring against each other. And if you measure and you're very careful to measure, then you'll always get your placement, the placement of your features correctly. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. This is the hard part. When it comes to drawing, this I think is probably the hardest part of all, and this is the part that nobody loves, but it's a really important step. If you want to immediately make your drawings look better, then start doing this, start practicing this, and don't let the frustration of it run away with you. One other thing is that you want to measure the angles. You want to use your pencils or your ruler, whatever it is that you've got, and you want to measure the angles of things, because I will tell you right now that what you think goes straight up and down probably doesn't. I'll give you an example. This angle on his face right here, it looks like it's straight up and down. But if we put it against a flat surface and we put it straight up and down, you can see that it has a slight angle to it, and that rather than being straight up and down, it's actually tilted slightly like this. It's those little details that are going to make the biggest difference. So the two things, now you've got two quick tips that are immediately going to make your drawings look better. Number one, draw from a tilted surface. Draw at an angle so that the paper is actually facing you, not facing flat. That's number one. Number two, remember that the tiniest details make the biggest difference. The tiniest degree change in an angle is going to make an enormous difference in your drawings. And remember that those degree changes take place in everything you draw. In the eyes, okay, each of the eyes go at different angles. There's even teeny tiny little little degree changes right here, between right here and right here. This goes up, this goes down. All of that stuff, you need to constantly be moving your pencil or your whatever you've got to measure with. You've constantly got to be moving it around and checking your angles and making sure that your eye isn't fooling you. Again, here's another one of those angles that looks like it's straight up and down, but again, when we measure it against something that is going straight across, you can see that no, it's actually tilted. There's another place. So like I said, remember that the eye will constantly try to fool you, and so don't trust just your eye. Your eye is going to be getting trained as you are doing this, so you will get better at spotting this stuff with your eye. But when you're just, well, even, you know what, even now, I constantly check my angles. I still am always, I'm a lot better at it, but I'm still constantly checking my angles. Okay, so now we're just going to be looking at a few of the typical relationships before we get started with our sketch. So let's just look at some typical relationships. We're going to be doing a human face also, but let's go ahead and look at some relationships on an animal's face. Cats' faces differ slightly. House cats tend to have small noses, big eyes. So their eyes relative to their noses are usually pretty big. Nevertheless, on most mammals, the divot in the eye, and it has a name and I don't remember what it is, so forgive me, but the divot on the eye usually lines up with the edge of the nose. And that's actually true of humans too, and we'll talk about that later. But on most mammals with forward-facing eyes, this divot lines up with the edge of the nose, and that's usually true of cats as well. If you see that the divot is closer to the nose, or that the divot is really far away from the nose, then you know that there's somewhat of a tilt or a turn to the face, and you're not actually looking at a straight-on face. One thing I would strongly suggest is that you start practicing this method using faces that are straight on. You're going to want to jump into 3/4, and you're going to want and side face, side views, profiles. All of that stuff is a lot more interesting to look at than just a face straight on, but it's really important for you to start with a straight on face, because if you don't understand the nature of the relationships, and if you haven't gotten a good grasp of it, you're not going to be able to get it with a 3/4 or the profile, and that's going to end up frustrating you. So make sure you do a bunch of these straight on first. Now, one of the first things that you want to do when you before you start measuring is you want to figure out if there's any kind of a head tilt, what angle it is that you're actually looking at. Now, you think your eye is going to tell you that you are looking at this dog head on and that his head is straight up and down. But in actuality, when you look at it, if you place the ruler in the middle of his head, you can see that, number one, we're not looking at a 100% straight on dog face. He's actually got his head at a little bit of an angle, okay? And you can tell that too, because this, with dogs, it's actually really easy, because the little line that's in their nose is right in the middle of their head. So if whatever way that line is tilting, that tells you the tilt of the head. And you can see that there's a pretty sort of gradual degree tilt there. Why is that important? Because if you try to, if you get all of the angles of this dog's head perfect, and then you try to plaster on features that are straight ahead instead of having the tilt, everything's going to look wrong and it's going to look skewed. So again, you want to get that tilt and figure that out first, okay? The other thing is that with dogs, any kind of dogs, this is dogs, wolves, anything like that, the tip of the ear here, the two planes of the ear. Now, dogs can have prick ears, the ears that go up and down. They can have floppy ears, all kinds of things. But typically, the tip of this ear will line up with the divot in their eye. That's not always true, so you definitely want to do your measurements. But generally, as a general rule, that's true. Another thing, and we're going to be doing more of this when we start our sketch, but another thing is that the top of the nose, where the plane shifts here, if you measure from the top of the nose there to the divot in the eye, I'm just going to keep calling it a divot, I don't remember that name, then from the divot in the eye to the top of the head, there generally about the same length. Every once in a while, you'll get like a coyote or somebody who has a longer snout, or they might have a little bit of a longer snout from a certain perspective. But generally speaking, you can measure from the nose to the eye, and then the eye to the top of the head. Occasionally with the head tilt change, you might have to measure from a different point in the eye, but it's always going to be equal. So that will help you to not get a snout that is too long. All right. Okay. And then the last thing is that the ears, typically the bottom of the ears will usually line up with the middle of the eye. So top of the ear generally lines up with, depending on the head tilt, either the divot in the eye, or sometimes if the head is tilted a certain way, it'll go look like it's more towards the middle of the eye. And then typically the bottom of the ear will line up with the crease in the eye here, the outer portion of the eye. All right, so let's go ahead and get to drawing. Okay, so I will typically, no matter whose face I'm drawing, I will typically start with a circle. And the reason for that is because it is easier for me just to have something put on the page. It just helps me to have something to go by. Even though I don't really technically use it as a marker, it just kind of helps me to start off. All right, so I'm going to start with just the quickest, most basic sketch. I'm not worrying about if anything looks good. I am just worried about getting placement. I'm not even worried about if the angles are right yet. I'm just worried about getting all of the features put in. It is just the most basic of sketches, and it's just going to tell me just where the face is. And just you want to keep your pencil moving. I'm just trying to basically find my lines and find about the length of the face. It's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to worry about that. And if you notice, I am just continually keeping my pencil moving until I find the line that, oh, okay, I found the line there. All right, so the bottom of his face is actually a little bit wider than that. Not much, but a little bit. Okay, and so I have got my very super basic. If your sketch looks good at this stage, then you're spending too much time on it. Then you're spending too much time trying to get details and trying to get it looking good. You do not want that. All right, some things that I can notice here. Number one, that my line here needs to be a little bit longer, and he has more of a tilt to his face there. Okay, and so I can lengthen this line out a little bit more. All right, and that his ear kind of has a little bit more of a tilt there. All right, so there we've got our very, very, very basic sketch. So at the next point, we are going to clean this up just a little bit, and we're going to start actually doing our measurements. Okay, so in the interim there, I just erased a lot of the extraneous lines, not all of them, but most of them, so that I could get a real look, so they weren't distracting. I could get a real look at what I've got. All right, and as you can see here, I've got the general outline of a dog's face, but there are points that I didn't quite get right, that my eye didn't get right. For example, the top of the head is way too thick, and the bottom of the head is way too pointy. It's kind of more like a goat. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually start doing the measurements so that we can get these kinds of things and the relationships so that we can get these kinds of things down properly. We're going to start off with measuring 2 points. We want to measure where the midpoint is on the head. We want to get the middle point, okay? And we kind of want to make sure that we get the tilt of that. So I'm going to get that down. All right, so let me do that. And you'll see that. You can see that the tilt is kind of like that, and it's over a little bit more than that. Okay, and then the other point that we want to get is we want to get the tilt of the top of the head. Okay, and so the tilt is kind of like this. Now, I generally, by the way, when I'm doing it now, I generally use my pencil for this. I don't usually use I don't usually use a straight edge, so it's totally fine. All right, and that's kind of a pretty drastic tilt to the middle of the middle of the head. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to kind of get in, we want to kind of just sort of mark in where the nose is. I typically will start with the nose because everything else relates to the nose. You don't need to get the perfect nose shape in, but you do want to kind of get the general size of the nose right, because everything else is going to fall according to where the nose is. Okay, and so you want to kind of try to get the edges of the nose about what you see. Now remember, this is not set in stone. Throughout the entire process, we're going to be chiseling everything down, okay? So at this step, it should not look good, and it's totally fine if your proportions are not right because you haven't finished measuring them yet. All right, and then so about here is the edges of your nose. All right, now let's look at where his eyes are in relation to the edges of the nose. If you line up the edge of his nose, you can see that the divot of his left eye is sitting pretty much right against the edge of that nose. The right eye is really far away. Well, not really far away, but it's pretty far away compared to the left eye, and that's because of the tilt of his head. His head's turned just ever so slightly. So what we want to do is we want to kind of just mark in, and his eyes tilt up just a little bit. So we want just, and again, we're not trying to be fancy and we're not trying to make it look good at this point. What we want to do is we want to get 2 eyes in, okay? Now, the other thing is that we have to remember is his head is on a tilt. So one of his eyes is going to be higher than the other. We probably won't know that just yet though, okay? So again, nothing fancy. All right, and then we want to start looking at the next thing that we want to start looking at. So we've got the basic features in. Okay, we don't know if it's the right distance yet. We don't know any of that stuff. We're just getting kind of generalizations in. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to measure the distances from the ears. Okay, you can see that his ear on the top is farther away from his eye than the ear on the bottom. The ear on the bottom is actually really close to his eye. And on my drawing here, his eye is really far away from the side of his face, okay? So I need to measure, and also I did not get a drastic enough tilt to his ear, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some measurements here, and you can watch those as I do them. This is why you have a sketch pad, and this is why you should do everything on your sketch pad and then transfer to your good paper. All right, so I'm just going to continue to do this, and I am going to continue to measure, and I'm going to continue to move stuff around until, and that's a little bit short, until I get measurements and proportions that look realistic for me. And you just keep chiseling and chiseling and chiseling. Okay, now his nose is a little bit big, so we're going to work on that. And so as you can see now, all right, his jaw is still a little bit skinny, so we're gonna do some more measurements and get that correct. And then next I'm going to measure the ears rather, and I'm going to put those in. So we're just going to basically at this stage just keep chiseling down. Don't worry about making it look good, because again, like I said, if you want this to be a finished drawing, you can transfer it to good paper. You want to be able to really move around your lines and feel comfortable with that. So at this stage, it's just a light working stage. One last thing that I just want to mention about this is that his eyes, okay, so his nose, so you can measure the top of his nostrils there to kind of find out the angle, and it kind of goes like this. Well, that angle is going to be the same angle as the eyes, and you need to make sure that on your drawing that you get those the same. Okay, you can see that his eyes are tilted, so his left eye, the eye that's on our right side, is going to be higher than, and it's going to be a pretty drastic tilt. It's going to be like this. So right there is where the top of that eye should be. So I actually have it a little bit high. Okay, so basically, long story short, we want to be able to move our lines around right now and just keep measuring against each other, okay, and measuring against the photo also. Okay, so at this stage, we have got most of, all of his features blocked in pretty well, and they're pretty proportionate. They are kind of the way that we like. First thing to keep in mind is don't try to love your sketch. Generally speaking, before the details are put in, sketches look pretty funny. They don't look as fancy and as nice as we'd like them to look, and that's because they're line drawings. And line drawings, if you practice your lines, line drawings can look very pretty in themselves, but they don't necessarily look as good as a drawing that has its details put in. So keep that in mind. A couple of things here. A couple of points to look at and to measure is you want to make sure that the nose and the eyes are going in the same direction. One of the most common mistakes, particularly that beginners make, and I've even seen advanced artists make this mistake, not very often, but they have made it, is that the eyes and the nose will be going in two different directions, or they'll be going on two different planes. And so you need to check multiple ways and multiple places to make sure that everything is lined up the way that it should be. First, you need to determine what angle you're going to be tilted at. It's easiest if you do that by measuring the nose first rather than measuring the eyes. So here's the way that I do it. There are markers on the nose. Like for example, the tops of the nostrils. Make sure that the tops of the nostrils are going in the same direction. On his nose is at a pretty good angle there, and so you try to get that as accurate as possible. If you don't get the exact, unless you're doing hyper realistic drawings, if you don't get the exact perfect measurement, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure that all of the measurements that you use on that face are the same. So it's okay if they're not exactly like the measurements on the picture, as long as they are exactly the same relative to each other. So here are those measurements. Okay, so you want to check the tops of the nostrils, the bottoms, and then just use your straight edge and move down. Make sure the bottoms of the nostrils are on that same plane. And my right nostril is just a tad bit too high. All right, and then make sure that the bottom of the nose is on that same plane also, and that none of the lines are going outside of there. What I'll typically do is I'll actually draw lines across so that I can actually see and make sure. Like for example, on my left nostril, his left nostril is just a tad bit too low. So I'm going to raise that just a little. And like I said, trust me when I tell you, the tiniest little change makes a very drastic difference to the eye. The eye can tell when something is off. Okay, so these all look pretty good. Now I want to check to make sure that the planes of the eyes are in the right places. So I want to just drag this up and make sure, and drag it up to the same spot. So you want to drag it up to the tops of the eyes. And as you can see, now let's double check this. And I think I got the... Okay, so I need to bring that left eye up just a little bit. Okay, so, well, actually more than just a little bit. So the plane of the eyes, even though it looks okay, it's not okay relative to the nose. And so that's going to look kind of funny unless I move that up. Unless I move, oops. So just keep measuring, just keep measuring, just keep measuring. So what I'll do next then is, okay, so I need to bring that left eye up in order to be on the same plane as the other eye and as the nose. So I'll do that next. And then so you don't want to measure anything else. Don't measure this ear or anything else against that eye until you get it placed. I can though, I can measure this side of the face because I have that eye in the place that I want it. So I'm just double checking and making sure that, yeah, that's about the right distance for what's on the photograph. That's roughly about the right distance. And it's roughly about the right distance from the eye to the side of the face. And I double checked and I measured and made sure that this was going in the right direction and all of that kind of good stuff. And this might be able to be lengthened just a tiny little bit, just the tiniest little bit. Okay, and like I said, again, the littlest. So that's the kind of stuff that I would be working on from here on out. Is I would make any major changes that I needed to make. This is a pretty major change. I'm going to need to redraw that eye. But then I would also start, you just want to whittle it down smaller and smaller and smaller until you get it exactly where you want it to be. And again, you're going to be checking relationships. Okay, is this in the right place? All right, where is the ear in relationship? Where is this ear in relationship to this eye? Okay, it is right inside that little divot, and then you check that on your drawing. Okay, did I get that right? Yep, I got that. I got that right. And just making all of the little adjustments. Okay, is this ear kind of right smack dab in the center? The bottom of this ear lines up perfectly with the little outside dink curve right there at the edge of his eye. So that's a really great marker. It's great. So a lot of times most of the times on faces, you will have exact markers like that. So at this point, you're just whittling down and whittling down until you get it to exactly where you want it to be. You're just taking smaller and smaller and smaller measurements and making adjustments as you go. Couple of quick parting thoughts here. Actually, I do want to show you something else before I part, but a couple of quick thoughts. Don't treat this as though it's the next Mona Lisa. You need to, yeah, it stinks. Oh my gosh, I have to redraw the eye all over again. I like the way that eye looks. Well, the next one that you draw is going to look even better than that, because every single time that you put some pencil to paper, you're getting better. So the next eye that you draw is going to look better, and it's going to be easier for you to draw. So don't treat this as though this is your finished drawing. You need to be able to move your lines around. And here's why. The last thing, now this is a drawing that I'm currently working on. This is actually a different photograph of him. I'm not using this, but you can kind of get the idea. It's a work in progress. But my point in showing this to you is because once you get all of the proportions down, now I took some liberties with his face. I thinned up his face a little bit. Some of the angles are a little bit different. This is also from when he was a little bit younger, so he was a little bit skinnier, but I also did some of that as well. And because once you learn proportions, and once you learn how to, once you master sort of the measurements and that kind of stuff, you can take all kinds of liberties and make changes to it as well. So keep that in mind too, that that learning how to take measurements on a face will also allow you to make changes to that face. You can make things bigger, make things smaller, and move things around. And even if you like drawing creatures and things like that are not necessarily real, but fantasy creatures, this is a great way to learn to be able to do that, because once you master this, you can do just about anything. One last tip, I promise. If you learn to do this well, really every other drawing that you do is going to improve, even if you're drawing fire trucks or fish or houses. It doesn't matter, because this takes you to the next level in terms of your observational skills. Nothing hones your observational skills faster than doing figure drawing and facial drawing, portrait drawing, because if there's just the littlest bit off, the eye will know it, and so it really trains your observational skills. All right, so I hope that was helpful for you. Please stay tuned for part 2 of this video series, where we will be doing this same thing but on a human face, and then part 3 where we will be doing it on a flower. So I hope that was helpful, like I said, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Or if you have a suggestion for another video that you would like me to do, please feel free to leave those as well. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much. Bye.